Hi, I'm Michael C. Hammer. I've compiled the following hour of helpful household hints to help you save time and money on home repairs and maintenance. This is Volume 1. To complete your home video library of helpful household hints, watch for Volume 2 coming soon to your favorite retail store. Now sit back and relax and see how easy it is to save time and money on home repairs and maintenance. First, inspecting your roof. I'm doing one of those jobs that needs to be done at least once a year, in either the spring or the fall. I recommend the spring, and that's inspect your whole roof. Inspect it in the spring for winter damage. Look at the front edge of the roof. Make sure that the sheeting's good and solid. Inspect the eaves trough. As a matter of fact, this one's going to need a lot of paint. Look at the valley where the two roofs come together. There's a lot of water runs down here, and in this particular case, it's going to need some work this summer. Next, look at the roof louvers. If there are any nails that are protruding, pound them in and then cover the heads with a roof putty. Then look at the ridge shingles. Make sure that they're down solid, that there's none that are damaged. Replace them or repair them if necessary. Then look at the chimney while you're up here. Make sure that the caulking where the flashing meets the chimney is good and solid. You don't want any openings for water rolling down that chimney to go down into your attic. Also look at the mortar. It may need repointing or replacing. Check the chimney cap and the flue to see that there are no voids in there. Inspect the roof thoroughly, inspect the chimney thoroughly, and make the repairs that are necessary to avoid any leaks or any problems each winter. If you've ever spilled paint on a concrete slab, as I did on this patio slab that I used to hold my garbage pails, you'll know how difficult it is to get paint off of concrete. Now, your best bet is to wipe it off first using some solvent and some dry cloths. Get up as much as you can. Matter of fact, a little bit of sawdust on there will soak up the surplus paint. Then use paint remover. Now, this unfortunately has dried, and so I'm going to have to use some heavy-bodied paint remover, and I'm only going to take the paint off of part of this so you can see the contrast. Use a brush, spread it around, but don't brush it. Just spread it. Now we'll have to let that stand for about 20 minutes and then come back to it and scrub it and run the water over it. We'll remove the polyethylene now. This has stood for about 20 minutes, and I think you can see the alligatoring here as that paint has started to blister. Scrub it with a stiff bristle brush, and that paint is going to come right off. It's best if you can use a water-soluble paint and varnish remover. Take the hose to it, and the paint problem is solved. I'm filling a bad crack in my basement wall, and if it isn't filled, I could have a flood in the spring or the fall because water takes the easiest route through any wall, and this crack runs right to the floor. When you're filling a crack in a concrete wall, use a hydraulic cement. This is one that expands as it dries instead of contracting as it dries. Once you've mixed it, you have to use it right away, and that's why you'll use it and fill just a little bit at a time because it does set in 2 minutes. Be sure that you clean out the crack, getting out all the little pieces, little bits and loose pieces of cement. Then I use a wet paintbrush and be sure that the crack is filled with water. This keeps the dry cement from absorbing the moisture in the concrete that you're putting in. When you've got the crack filled, smooth it off, and then you're ready to move farther down that crack. Be sure that you continue cleaning and wetting the crack as you go along. And as I said earlier, Remember, only mix enough cement that you can use it before it sets. Add cold water to it, or it's going to set before you have it stirred. I think the level is the most misunderstood tool in the workshop. When you're going to buy a level, be sure that you get one that has a detailed booklet with it so you can get the most out of that level. Secondly, look for one that has windows at either end and one in the middle. Make sure that in those little windows you have the spirit tubes that you can be sure to read this way or this way. Select a level that's at least 28 to 30 inches long so that you'll get a true reading when you're plumbing a wall or leveling a countertop. There are two words that you're going to run into in that level that you should be familiar with. One is plumb, which means that it's plumb or vertical to the pull of gravity. The other is level, which means it's level or horizontal to the pull of gravity. When you're plumbing a wall, look at this little window here and you'll see two spirit tubes. One of them has a black line at either end and a bubble in the middle. When that bubble is directly between those two black lines, your wall is plumb. Now, the same thing applies when you're making a countertop level. When you buy your level, be sure that it's made of metal, that it's at least 28 to 30 inches long, and read the instruction booklet. That way, you'll always be on the level. What I'm doing is cleaning the humidifier components from my furnace. There are two areas in that humidifier that really have to be kept clean. One of them is a humidifier tray, and this is the tray that holds the water. And you'll find that it'll get quite a few salt deposits in there and even some lime depending on exactly where you live. The best way to clean this is to put as hot a water as you can get into it and about a half a cup of white vinegar and allow it to soak. After it's soaked overnight, you'll be able to use one of those plastic scrubbers and scrub out that lime. The other component is the drum. Now, in most cases, the drum is a sponge pad that goes around a wire frame and it's held on with a net. I use an ordinary scrub bucket, fill it with hot water, as hot as you can get out of the tap, and then soak that drum in the bucket overnight. But first, add a cup of white vinegar. Now, this will help dissolve the deposits. I keep two of these drums. As soon as I take one out to soak it, I put the other one in the humidifier and I allow this one to soak for 3 or 4 days. If you follow these steps, your humidifier should be trouble-free all winter. If you thought that you'd like to put a beam up in that family room or even in the kitchen, and you'd like to put a nice 6x4 beam or 4x4 beam, solid wood, can you imagine how heavy that'll be and how hard it's going to be to hold it up against the ceiling? The ideal type of beam to use there is a box beam, and I'll show you how to make one. I make my box beams by using a piece of 1x4 on the side, a piece of 1x4 on this side, and a piece of 1x4 for the floor. Now, that 1x4 must be nailed between the two sides, and I'll show you why in just a moment. Put the nails in through either side and make a U-shaped box beam. When that's done, you're ready to fasten that beam to the ceiling. Now, this is the important part. A piece of 1x4 nailed to the ceiling with two 2.5-inch standard twisted nails every 16 inches, and that's nailing to the ceiling joists. Then you place the U-shaped box beam right over top of that and nail it through the sides. Now you have a hollow box beam that can be used to fish electrical wires through, or even the cable for your TV antenna if this box beam happens to be in your family room. Put the beam up like that and you'll have no problems. How many times have you made a telephone call and been put on hold? Well, I'm going to show you how to put your paintbrush on hold while you talk on the phone. The solution to the problem you'll find in just about every kitchen. First of all, you have to seal those wet bristles off from the air, or they're going to dry out and get hard. Use a plastic bag from the kitchen, wrap it up, and use a wire tie right around that handle. Now it's sealed, and you can go on talking on the phone or maybe even run down to the store, and that paintbrush will stay soft and pliable. There is another solution to that particular problem too, and that is the aluminum foil that you'll find in the kitchen. Wrap the brush in the foil and be sure that it's good and tight and well sealed off. The secret to keeping a brush pliable is to keep the air away from it. The only way you're going to do this is with a piece of aluminum foil or a piece of polyethylene or a plastic bag. But you must be sure that it's sealed tightly around the bottom and all the way around the edges. Otherwise, the air is going to get to it, and that brush is going to get hard. If you plan on painting your house or your garage, then it's a good idea to wash that siding down before you start to paint. If you don't wash the siding, you'll find that there's oxidization from the paint, there's residue, dust, grime, and when you try to paint over that, you'll find that the paint won't bond. And in a year, maybe 2 years, you'll find that that paint has begun to run off, or it may just disappear. So it must be washed. Now, it's not necessary to use a soap or a detergent. Just a good force of water from the nozzle of a hose and an old broom such as the one I'm using. And this is the way you do it. You can see that water running down. You may even be able to see the dirt running down. But with the hose, forcing the water along the siding and the broom to brush it off, you find that you'll end up with good, clean siding. Of course, let it dry before you start to paint. If you wash your own car and you have one of those long-handled brushes that you connect the hose at the end, that's an ideal type of tool to use to wash the siding with, too. But I must stress, be sure it's clean and be sure it's dry. If you've ever had to cut a piece of paneling and get a nice, neat, fine edge, and then found that the veneer flaked as you made your cut with the saw, I know that that can be rather frustrating. There is a way to do it and keep that veneer from flaking. This would be the method. After you've made the mark on the paneling, lay the square down, and then using a wallboard knife, and be sure that that blade is good and sharp, draw it right across the paneling. You may want to do that a couple of times in order to cut through that surface veneer. Then you take the square away, set your saw in place, and be sure that the saw is to the waste side of the wallboard knife cut, and then start to make your saw cut. You'll find that that cut will come out nice and clean and smooth, unlike this one here, which is quite ragged. Try that on the next piece of paneling that you're going to cut, and you'll find that it will look very professional, and when the job is finished, you won't see any ragged edges. If you've ever had to remove a piece of arborite from a countertop, and I know many people have had to take that little piece of edge trim off because they do have a tendency to get damaged sometimes. It is difficult unless you can release the glue somehow. One of the ways I've found is to heat release it using an iron. Now, don't let your wife catch you using it without a cloth. Iron the surface and keep that iron moving. Now, keep it set, around Dacron or rayon. That's about the temperature. And you'll see that that is beginning to release the glue underneath. Now I'll add a screwdriver in here as a wedge. Keep ironing the surface as you move along, and it'll keep coming up. Keep driving the screwdriver in. You may even want to use little wooden wedges. You'll have to move along the whole surface of this arborite, and you can see how easily that's peeling away because we've heated the whole surface. Don't set the hot iron directly on the arborite because you will melt a little bit of the plastic and gum up the surface, but it is easy to do. I'm taking some glass out of an old sash, which I plan on refinishing into a mirror. When you're taking glass out, there are two tools to use, the screwdriver and a blowtorch. Now the blowtorch will soften up the putty, and the screwdriver you'll be able to scrape it out with. And if you look closely, you'll see how easily putty comes out when it's hot. See it softening up there? Now watch. If I hadn't softened that putty, it would have been very difficult to get it out, and I might even have broken the glass. When you're ready to reglaze that sash, I'm going to make some suggestions. First of all, prime it. That's the area where you're going to put the glass in. Use an oil-based primer to seal the wood. The reason you do that is to keep the oils from the putty from soaking into the bare wood. If the oil soaks in, you'll find that you won't have a good bond, and you won't have a good glazing job. After you've finished glazing, allow the putty to set before you paint it or before you stain and varnish it. If you follow these instructions, you'll find that glazing that sash will be just as smooth as glass. If you live in a split-level home, you know how difficult it is to find some place to store such things as overnight bags, luggage, and those Christmas decorations. Well, I found a place, the attic over the lower level. Now, the access to the attic over the lower level is just off the stairway leading to the upper level. It makes an excellent place to get into that attic. Simply open the doors that are provided during construction, and you can put a room up here. The reason for the room is that when we put insulation in our houses to conserve energy, we're getting 8, 9, 10 inches of insulation. And you simply can't just set anything on the 2x4 or 2x5 joists. So a floor is provided. I've built walls across the back and down each side, put insulation in those walls, and simply covered them on the inside with a light hardboard. Once those are covered and the ceiling is covered, you've got a room to store things in, neat and clean. And it really isn't that cold. But it does stay cold enough for us to store potatoes and apples in the wintertime. In the back wall, it's important that you put an access hatch. Now mine has a couple of screws in it that I simply take the hatch off, and I have access to the rest of my attic if I need to get in there for wiring or heating reasons. One of the questions that I'm asked in my appearances around the country is, how do you use a miter box? Many people have told me that when they put the molding into the miter box, make the cut, it just doesn't come out right. And no matter how hard they try, they can't get that miter on properly. Well, you have to put the molding into the miter box the right way to get it to come out the right way. Consider the miter box a room with a floor and a wall. And if you're going to use a molding like this chair rail and put it on the wall, then it must go into the miter box that way. It can't be laid down on the floor and the cut made, because if it's made that way, it'll come out of the miter box with a 45 and it'll make a perfect picture mold. The back of that molding must be placed against the wall of the miter box. Make your 45, and then it will go into the corner the way it was meant to. Another type of molding that you will use quite often is a sealing mold. Now this is a hollow back sealing mold, and it's a difficult one to cut because you can't hold it in place. Simply put another piece of the same type of molding underneath, it'll wedge in place, and you can make that 45-degree cut. Once you've made it, take it out of the box, and you'll find that that whole project has been squared away. In past shows, we've talked about preserving wood for outside use, whether it would be steps or a fence. And I have a shutter here that the instructions weren't followed on. It wasn't preserved, it wasn't properly painted. Now, as an example, this shutter, dry rot has set in so badly I can put my finger right into the center of that piece of wood and pull pieces of rotted wood out. With a little encouragement, this shutter will fall completely apart. Now, the next shutter that goes up here will have to be preserved properly and painted properly. The preserving will go on first, of course, on the bare wood. And you must preserve it on both edges, the top and the bottom, the front and the back. Allow it to dry, and then put a primer coat of paint on. Now, if you're going to use latex paint, use a primer meant for latex. If you're going to use oil-based paint, use a primer meant for oil-based. Once your primer is dry, then it's ready to put on your first coat of finished paint, making sure the back and the front of the shutter is painted, the edges, and the top and the bottom. When that's done, you're ready to put on your last coat of paint. And be very meticulous with this to be sure that every piece of wood has been completely covered, and then you shouldn't have any more problems with dry rot in that shutter. If you've ever done any refinishing, you know that there's a broad selection of finishes to use. Varnish, shellac, wax finishes, even some of the plastic finishes can be used on furniture. And sometimes it's very difficult to decide which one to use. Well, there is a finish that's been around for centuries. And as I understand, it comes from the Orient. It's called tung oil. It comes in an oil finish, and it comes in a tung oil varnish. Now, the tung oil can go right directly on the bare wood. You can use a paintbrush and select a good paintbrush, one that isn't going to leave a lot of bristles and streak marks on the wood. Or you can use cheesecloth. Now, that's lint-free, and when you apply it with the cheesecloth, you're not going to leave a lot of lint on it. There is another way that many people don't think about using, and that's simply pouring the tung oil on the surface and rubbing it in with the heel of your hand. Now, you can see how that brings up the rich color and the graining of that wood. Using the heel of your hand, the heat from your hand helps force the tung oil into the pores. And you'll be surprised how quickly it dries and is ready for the next coat. My wife and I collect antiques, and one of our favorites is this old brass hurricane lamp. When we found it, though, you wouldn't have known whether it was brass or copper or silver. It was really crusty and corroded and covered with dirt. Now, we used a brass cleaner and lots of elbow grease. It took quite a while to clean it up, but when it was done, it was very bright, and as you know, brass comes up with a very soft gold color when it's polished. Many times you'll find a lamp, however, that looks like nice and bright, but when you try to polish it, nothing happens. The reason nothing happens is that it's been coated with lacquer. Now, lacquer is clear, but it keeps the polish from reaching the brass. When you've used this brass cleaner, nothing happens. So you use a lacquer thinner or a varnish remover. Coat the whole area, and it will dissolve that lacquer right down to the brass. Use your brass cleaner and polish it up. Now, maintaining it after that is going to be easy. I use a cotton material that's impregnated with a cleaner, and about every 2 or 3 months, I go over the whole lamp with this, and then with a soft cloth that'll buff it up, and it'll bring it back to that beautiful gold color. If you're planning a paint job, be sure to select the right paint for the job. The proper selection will mean a big difference in the end result. As an example, If you're going to paint the eaves trough on the outside of your house, they're made of galvanized metal, you'll want to select a paint that's meant for painting galvanized iron. Be sure to read the instructions on the container because you'll find that you have to clean that galvanized metal with mineral spirits if you expect a good bond between the paint and the galvanized metal. When you're painting inside, you can use an alkyd-based paint or a latex-based paint. Now, the alkyd-based paint is a low-luster enamel and can be used in kitchens or in bathrooms, and you'll be able to wash that easily. Of course, you'll wash the brush out with mineral spirits. Latex paint is a flat, and it can be used in just about any other room in the home. You'll wash the brush out with water. If you're going to paint an iron railing outside, something that might rust, select a paint that's a rust inhibitor. Be sure to read all of the instructions on all of the different types of paints because the manufacturer has formulated that particular paint for that particular job. The selection of the right paint will give you a job that you can be proud of. The quickest way to paint something is with a spray bomb. Now, if you've never used a spray bomb, it may not be quite as easy for you the first time as using a paintbrush, but after you've gotten the knack of it, you'll end up with a very smooth job. Be sure that you shake that container until all of the paint inside is mixed up. Read the manufacturer's instructions because there may be something special there. And then what I like to do is take a few practice shots with a new spray can so I'll see what size of spray line it makes. Now, when you're spraying, if you use this action, you're going to find that in the middle there'll be lots of paint, and on the outside edges there won't be as much. If you hold the can this way, you'll find that there'll be a heavy line of paint which will start to run. You must move the spray bomb parallel to the work. Now, you can see what size spray that nozzle makes on this old piece of cardboard. Now, when you're finished spraying, turn the container upside down and spray it until no more paint comes out. When you store a spray bomb, if you haven't cleaned out those tubes, you'll find that the paint will plug it up, and when you go to use it the next time, nothing will come out. I'll bet you've never seen a wall quite this small before. This is one of the models that I use when I'm instructing around the country on how to build family rooms, rec rooms, or on basic construction. This wall contains pretty well all of the components of basic construction that you'll need in any wall that you build. I'd like to point those components out to you. The top is the top plate. That's the part that you nail to the ceiling up above. This is the bottom plate, and you nail that to the floor. Each one of these wood members is a stud. Now, you build that wall laying with it on the floor, nailing from either end into those studs. After all of the components have been put in place, it's time to stand that wall up, use the level to plumb it and make sure it's straight up and down. But there are two components that you won't put in when it's laying down. That's the double studs on either side of a rough stud opening for a door. And you'll notice that there are two studs there. It makes it easier to nail trim and paneling on. Leave these two studs out, putting the outside ones in, marking where they will be cut off. Once the wall's in place, make those cuts, take that centerpiece out, and nail in that double stud, and you're ready to put your paneling and trim on. I'd like to take some time to talk to you about vapor barriers. Now, vapor barriers don't add to the decoration of a house. You don't really see them when you go in the house. But if you don't have some, you'll notice the difference. You'll see the results. And a vapor barrier can be made of many things. First of all, on bad insulation, you'll find vapor barriers in the form of impregnated tar paper. But they do have a way of getting torn when you're applying the insulation bats. You'll find polyethylene, that's the clear plastic, and in several thicknesses that can be used. Aluminum foil can be used. But something else that will help when you decorate your house and become a vapor barrier too is an oil-based paint. Now when we're adding lots of insulation to the house, when we're putting in weather stripping, storm windows, our house isn't breathing. And any humidity that's in the house in the wintertime has to go somewhere, and it will condense on windows. It will force its way through walls. And if there's no vapor barrier there, it will contact the outside wall, condense and become moisture, and then the paint peels on the outside of the house. So when you've added insulation, paint with an oil-based paint, and you'll have a built-in vapor barrier. How many times do you have to do that to keep your water tank from running on and on and on? There's a lot of water wasted down the drain because toilet tanks are not efficient, because they leak, because valves don't stop properly, any number of reasons. So I'd like to show you how to replace the parts in a toilet tank. Now I hope that you don't have a toilet tank like this one, or you're going to end up with a lot of water in your bathroom. First thing you do is reach underneath the tank and shut off the water. Secondly, flush the toilet and allow all of the water to run down the drain. You'll have to hold the handle down so that the valve stays open. Next, take a sponge and mop up the surplus water that's in that tank, so when you take the tank off, you're not going to end up with a puddle on the floor. Next, there are two bolts, brass bolts, holding this tank to the bowl. Remove them, and then you're ready to take that tank off. When you take the tank off, simply remove the seal and start to remove the bolts on the end here. Now these may be brass or they may be plastic. When you're considering replacing these parts, look at some of the newest ones that have come out to save water. If you've ever used plasterboard or gypsum board or wallboard, they're all one and the same. They're paper finish on top of plaster. And you know that it can be difficult to cut with a saw. It creates a lot of dust. In fact, it'll dull that blade on your saw. The best way is to lay a square on the board or run a chalk line across it, then use a wallboard knife, and that's what they were specifically made for. Very sharp blade. Draw the wallboard knife across the paper, cutting the surface, and then bend it and it breaks. Cut the paper on the back, and you've got the two pieces and a nice, clean, even cut. One of the other things that many people find difficult to do with wallboard is to cover that joint. Now the joints are beveled, and you use a specially formulated joint cement. Now not ordinary patching cement, but joint cement. Before you put the joint cement on, you can stick on a specially made fiberglass tape or embed a paper tape in the joint cement. After the first coat of joint cement is dry, most people want to sand it. Now that creates a great amount of dust. The simplest way is to use a wet or damp sponge across that joint, and it'll smooth it off without dust. Today, the words are energy conservation. And many people would like to participate in energy conservation, but they maybe don't know where to start. Well, one place you can start is with your thermostat. Now, in the wintertime, if you keep your thermostat, say, at 74, set it back. You'll conserve energy. I'm not suggesting, however, that you set it way back to 50 degrees, because that's going to really be too cold. But set it back at least 6 degrees to, say, 68. Now, if you feel a little cool, put a sweater on. But research shows that for every 1 degree that you set back your thermostat, you're going to save 2.5% on your fuel bill. If you've set it back 6 degrees, that's approximately 15%. Now, at today's prices, you know how much money you're going to save. But many people have said it's too much work setting it up and setting it down when I go to work and when I get up. A double setback thermostat is the thing that you can use. Now, what this does is it sets the temperature back a half an hour before you go to bed, sets it up again a half an hour before you get up, sets it down when you go to work, and sets it up when you come home from work. This means that you can save a lot more money on that energy bill. So put in a double setback thermostat and save money every winter. I'd like to show you how to paint a door the right way. Now, if you're going to paint the door, it should be done on the inside as well as the outside. If you paint it on the outside and stain and varnish it on the inside, you're going to have nothing but trouble. The door is going to take on moisture and give off moisture at different rates because it has two different finishes on it. On the inside, in the wintertime, when the furnace is on, you'll start drying out that door and it'll start to warp. In the summertime, when the humidity is higher, then the door will probably straighten out. On the painted side where the sun is shining, that door is probably not going to dry out at all. It's not going to change an awful lot, and so you're not going to get movement in the front part of that door. My suggestion is paint the outside and paint the inside. Now, that's not the only place that you'll paint. If the hinges are on this side and the door is opening like this, naturally you're going to paint this edge, the front, and the back, but you may forget the hinge side. You may also forget the top, but the place that's going to get a lot of moisture when it rains and it's hitting that concrete step and bouncing up is the bottom. So paint front, back, sides, bottom, and top if you want that door to keep from warping. I wonder how many of you are like I was the first time I saw one of these handy little devices. I wondered what in the world it was. Well, what it is a self-chalking chalk line. This little door allows you to put powdered chalk of any color in. It comes in blue, pink, yellow, white. And when you draw the cotton line out the end like this, that line is completely chalked. Now, where would you use it? Well, carpenters use it. Carpet installers use it. Tile layers use it. If you're going to cut a piece of plywood that's 8 feet long, you certainly can't reach from one end to the other with a straight edge. So all you would do is simply slip the little hook on the one end of the chalk line over one end of the plywood, draw it out to the other end, and make sure you've pulled that line very tight. Reach into the middle and snap it. And that's going to leave a nice blue line all the way down that piece of plywood. Now, it's going to make it easy for you to cut that piece of plywood in a straight line. And when it comes to cutting a piece of carpet that's 12 feet long and you can't reach both ends, use the chalk line. You can simply follow that line with a very sharp knife. Use the chalk line properly and you'll chalk up another success. Oh, you caught me getting ready to clean up. If you live in a split-level home and you have an entrance that runs off of the backyard and in at the lower level, you'll know that there is a drain in that lower level. And you may have problems at that drain if it isn't serviced properly. Actually, the drain lid and grate should be kept in all the time, but as you can see, there's a space under there. This area needs to be cleaned out. All of that dirt, collection of leaves pulled out of there. This drain goes right down to your weeping tile. And if you leave the grill off of it like that and leaves and dirt get down in there, it could plug that weeping tile up and you're going to run into some real problems. Clean it out and keep the grate in. The water will run down. It's meant to be like that. Also, keep the area swept up. Now, there are a lot of leaves, as you can probably see. Keep all of the leaves swept out of there, especially in the wet weather when you may have water collecting down in this well. Because if the leaves run over top of that grill, they'll plug it up, and you may only have a 2-inch or 1-inch sill in here that the water will roll over and underneath the door, and then you've got a real flood. Well, back to work. There's no need to take that light fixture down when you're ready to paint a ceiling. I don't know how many times you've splattered light fixtures. I know I've splattered enough in my time, but I found a little trick several years ago. That trick is to use a garbage bag. Of course, you're going to make sure that the light is turned out before you start to put the bag over it. You may have to get a bigger bag if you have an extremely large fixture. Pull it tight at the top, then use a wire tie to secure it in place. Once it's secured, you're ready to start that paint job. Now you may want to loosen the plate at the top here just to drop it down so that you can paint around underneath it. But that's not going to drop the whole fixture. So all you'll do is loosen up the screws on either side. They don't even have to come out. Just enough that that plate can be brought away from the ceiling. Now you may have to put a screwdriver underneath it and pop it down because it may have gotten stuck in place from the last paint job. That's a neat way to cover up the light fixture, and this can be done with just about any size light fixture before you start painting those ceilings. You can change the look of your kitchen by simply changing the hardware on the doors. Now be sure that when you do change the hardware, you select something that's compatible with the decor of the kitchen. For instance, if you have a colonial kitchen, don't select Spanish hardware. If you have a Spanish kitchen, don't select French provincial. Now if you look closely at this particular knob, it fits into the Spanish design because it has a filigree right in the center of the knob. However, if you'd like French provincial, this is French provincial, and this is what it'll look like when it's on your kitchen cupboard. However, there is something wrong with this. You'll notice it hangs over the panel. It was selected without taking into consideration the size of the stiles around the cupboard door. If you wanted colonial, say in hammered copper, it'll look like this. The copper is hammered, and you'll see that it has surface mounting screws. In the case of holes having been drilled for bolts, you'll have to fill those holes, drill them again, and put the surface mounting screws in. Now when you're selecting any type of hardware, select something that you can make use of and something that's going to look good with the rest of the kitchen. I'd like to give you a few tips on how to put bat insulation in your attic. I'm going to use a model that I carry with me when I lecture on insulation. To do a good insulation job, you must cover everything, and that includes the rafters. These are the rafters in the attic. This is the plastered area of the ceiling down below. Too many people take an insulation bat and simply lay it across the top like this. That covers the rafters, but it leaves an airspace here. And that airspace acts as a duct carrying cold air from one side of the house to the other. Now the reason you cover the rafters is if you don't, they become colder than this part of the ceiling, and you'll have condensation forming, dust sticking to it, making those little gray dust lines. Cut insulation bats so they fit tightly in between the rafters and coming in contact with the old insulation, so there are no cold air ducts. Then cut a piece of bat, set it on top of the rafter, and now you've got not only between the rafters insulated with, say, an R20, but you now have an R20 over top of that rafter, and you're not going to have any condensation and dust forming on the ceiling. You know, a dripping tap is not only annoying, it's downright wasteful. And I'd like to show you how to take a tap apart and repair it. The first step is shut the water off, because if you don't, you're going to have a flood. Then you take the handle off and take the cartridge out. Now you may require a wrench to remove this cartridge, but when you get it out, you'll find the washer is on the end with a little bolt. Remove the bolt, and the washer should spring free. If not, you can pry it out. Now that washer is gone. As a matter of fact, this cartridge is shot, and take it down to the plumber to get a new one just like it, and then throw the old one away. Inside your tap is a seat. Check it with your finger. If it's cracked, pitted, or chipped, use a seating wrench to take that seat out with. Now sometimes it's a little tough, but it does come out. Once you've gotten that seat out, you can replace it with a new one. Now this may be small, but it's important because that's where your washer seats to shut off the water. You know, if you have a tap that is dripping like this, you're wasting 17,000 gallons of water a year. And if that happens to be hot water, you're wasting money and energy. If you've ever tried to solder a water line and it hasn't been too successful, maybe you missed one of the most important steps. First of all, you must clean that pipe. I use steel wool, polish it. It is copper and it'll come up quite shiny. Do the same thing with the elbow that you're going to apply. Then put a little flux on that pipe and also on the elbow. Next, melt the flux and do the same thing with the elbow. Heat it up until you've melted the flux. The secret to soldering is heating the pipe and allowing the solder to melt on the pipe. The solder will run and you'll be able to wipe it all the way around that pipe. Remove the heat and wipe it with a cloth. Next, you're ready to apply the elbow. Now make sure you've got it running in the direction that you want it to before you heat it up. Heat the elbow. It'll melt the solder underneath, but as one added safety feature, add a little solder right around the edge of that elbow, and you'll have a good watertight connection. We're looking at a fence post that's really creating problems for me. It's rotted at the bottom and it's making the fence very weak and wobbly. The reason that wood rots when it's in the ground is that water lays next to the post and dry rot sets in. The ground on the other side of this fence slopes towards the post, and the water runs down and lays there, and it soaks into the wood. It should be treated with wood preservative. Now I'd like you to look at the bottom of this post and I'll show you just how badly rotted it is. Look at this white wood and how soft it is here. It just breaks away in my fingers. And there's a hole goes right back into the middle of that post. It was treated with wood preservative. This stake that I pulled out of the garden wasn't treated with wood preservative, and it's only been in the ground less than 3 years, where the post has been in for 12 years. When you're building a patio deck, a fence, you're doing anything with wood outside, you should preserve the wood, especially where two pieces cross, because it'll get wet and dry rot will set in. Do all of that before you start to paint. If you preserve the wood and paint it properly, you should get rid of most of those dry rot problems in your outside wood projects. If you've ever had to put a chair back together again, and this one was completely apart, there are a couple of things that you should know. First of all, the stretchers that hold the legs apart need to be glued into the holes that are in the leg. Now, if this has been glued in the past, as they usually have been, you must get all of that old glue off so that the new glue will absorb into the wood and become part of the stretcher and part of the leg. Now, that's not easy to do, but get as much of it off as you can. And some of the old glue really just chipped off. Holding those stretchers and those legs together tightly after they've been glued is also a trick, because you can't put a clamp on it. But if you take a piece of rope, binder, twine, or something along that line, and twist it together. Use a piece of wood or a screwdriver and just keep twisting until it's become tight. And you'll see that getting tighter and tighter. Slip the screwdriver in behind the stretcher and allow it to stay there overnight. Now once that's been pulled together and it's hard and tight, you can simply take the screwdriver out, remove the rope clamp, and that chair is going to be as good as new. I'm doing one of those jobs that I found needed doing after inspecting my roof last, and that's repairing and patching the valley. The valley on a roof really is a riverbed. All of the water from the two slopes on this roof meets here and runs down, and in a rainstorm it washes off quite a bit of the gravel here, and this valley is in really bad shape. You'll want to wear rubber gloves, I'm sure, because the material you're going to use is an asphalt material. It could be fibrated roof coating, or it could have an aluminum base, but in either case it's black and it's going to make your hands messy. Pick up an old paintbrush. This one is this one should have been thrown away years ago, but I kept it for this particular purpose. Once it's all messed up, then I can toss it away and not worry about cleaning it. When you get into putting the roof coating on, you'll start at the top, work your way down, but be sure to lift the shingles so that you can put coating underneath, and while it's still wet, press the shingles into place. Now in the case of these shingles, I'm going to have to seal this shingle to the next one as well, so that they won't blow up, so that water and ice and snow doesn't go in underneath. Do a good job, and you won't have to repair that again for several more years. Selecting the right hammer is only half the battle. Using it properly is the other half. Now, many do-it-yourselfers, when they're building a rec room or building a garage or a fence, will wear their arm out in about an hour. So use the hammer the right way. If you're going to do a construction job and drive a construction nail, use a construction hammer. Now, don't choke the hammer. The hammer has a handle that's shaped to fit your hand so that you can give it leverage action. Let the hammer do the work and save your arm. Now, if you happen to have to take that nail out, put a block under the head of the hammer and again use the hammer's leverage. If you're going to put a small 1-inch nail into a piece of wood, then use a tack hammer. Now, in using a tack hammer, when you grasp the handle, point the index finger down the handle, and that will give you more control on that hammer and nail. And tap, tap, tap until you've driven the nail completely in. The selection of the right hammer, using it the right way, will save a lot of strength and save you a lot of energy and a sore arm when that project is over. So follow these steps. The right hammer for the job, and use it the right way, and save your time and energy. The handsaw you're most likely to find in the average do-it-yourselfer's workshop is a crosscut saw. It's so named because you cut across the grain of a piece of wood. We use crosscut saws more often than we use rip saws because we have electric saws to do that ripping down a long piece of wood. When you're selecting a saw, select one of quality. A quality handsaw has precision ground teeth. A crosscut saw should be 8 or 10 point, which simply means that there are 8 to 10 teeth per inch. Now, when you're handling a saw, don't set it down on its teeth. Always lay it flat. If you're going to hang that saw up, hang it with the back down on the hook and another hook under the handle. By the way, don't pick a saw up by its blade. Your fingers will leave some residue which will encourage rust. And when you get rust on the blade, it's going to make your work an awful lot harder. This saw is well over 100 years old, and the corner's been taken out because it was dropped, but it's still usable. Handle your hand saws with care. Buy some scrap wood and practice on it. And in coming weeks, we're going to show you how to use a handsaw the best way.